You know how in the Half-Life games you can occasionally see the G-Man spying over you? Staring at you like the freak that he is? Usually he'll do this standing in a tram, from in front of a barn, or from on a bridge. There's also the less obvious appearances, such as a very brief instance where he'll appear at a TV screen in the later chapters of Half-Life 2, including inside of a machine? Yeah, this is a G-Man sighting that is just strange. This is seen in the Black Mesa East chapter of Half-Life 2, specifically in Eli's lab, which has a variety of machines, gadgets, gizmos, doodads, you get the picture. One of these is some type of generator thing that a Vortigaunt will put some form of power core into. Before they do that, however, take a look. Put your face in it. What do you see? Yeah, G-Man. Inside of this weird generator. Can't see it? Let's change the lighting.
Holy crap!
You are creepy as
Remember this, because we're going to come back to it given that this small detail showed me something about one of gaming's most famous and mysterious characters. Face the facts. The G-Man is iconic, and this is in no part due to the fact that he is understood. We know who he is, except we don't. Let's talk about it. The G-Man has had numerous appearances over the last 26 years. Holy crap, he's been around a while. And each one has given us a much clearer picture of who the guy really is. But even to this day, and after all this time, his true identity still remains unknown. I should clarify that this is not a video about who he truly is. That's the type of thing for MadPat to do. He actually did that already.
In one fell swoop, we are told outright that the G-Man is not man.
He was wrong. Of course, that's just a theory. We don't really know who he is, which is what makes him so iconic. Think about that for a second. What makes a character good or bad, or iconic? What makes them memorable? Pagan Min from Far Cry 4 is iconic because despite being the main villain, he's kind of not.
Maybe now we can finally shoot some goddamn guns.
GLaDOS is a psychotic AI who can live forever and is the continuation of a real human being, and Wario is stinky because he eats garlic. You get the point. So what makes the G-Man iconic? One might argue that much like the wait for Half-Life 3, he's been around for a long time. Remember, he's existed since 1998 for nearly 26 years. Despite all of that time, we've only gotten a handful of games of his presence, which if anything have just made his character more complicated. In the original Half-Life, the G-Man was an ominous figure, constantly being seen throughout the entire game, watching Gordon and talking with scientists, always being out of reach, yet so close. His identity remains completely hidden until the end of the game, where it is revealed that he reports to unspecified employers, and references how Gordon's now missing weapons were, quote, government property.
I took the liberty of relieving you of your weapons. Most of them were government property.
In 1998, there was very little to indicate who he was, and given the context provided, it would be completely fair to assume that he was a government man, hence his name. Opposing Force and Blue Shift do also have the respective G-Man appearances, which further support, and don't support, this idea. Opposing Force is especially unique given how he'll actively hinder and help Adrian Shepard. However, given there is a constant debate as to whether or not these games are actually canon, and the fact that they were developed as third-party expansions by Gearbox, means that we're not going to talk about them. All we need is the mainline games. Half-Life 2, 6 years following the release of the original Half-Life, immediately opens with G-Man waking Gordon up with the famous line,
"Rise and shine, Mr. Freeman. Rise and shine."
This opening makes it apparent that much time has passed following the first game, given that the G-Man is quite literally waking up Gordon Freeman, preceding his arrival at the City 17 train station and the relatively quick realization that not only has time passed, but Gordon's location has also changed to Eastern Europe. Some theories have pointed to the G-Man being, well, not a man. This point of view appearance, which occurs multiple times in Half-Life 2 and its episodes, would support them, implying that Gordon is physically in a different location and can be moved by the G-Man. A line spoken by a citizen on the City 17 train supports this, when they say,
I didn't see you get on.
The ending of Half-Life Alyx supports this even further, with a cut line from the G-Man's ending speech showing that Alyx asked what he was rather than who he is, as heard in the retail version. Interestingly enough, the retail version actually has G-Man respond to this question referring to himself as a what, with the statement,
"Perhaps what I am is not as important as what I can offer you in exchange for coming all this way."
Another caricature that the G-Man embodies is the way he speaks. It's not only a very unique way of speaking, it is also very inhuman given the fact that he stresses the wrong syllables and often speaks in a tone that is evocative of someone who doesn't understand human languages.
That's why I'm here, Mr. Freeman, and where no harm can come to you.
I trust it will all make sense to you in the course of when their only experience of humanity was a crowbar.
What if I could offer you something you don't know you want?
We're not really going to delve deep into whether the G-Man is or isn't human, but there is a point to bringing this fact up. We don't know if the G-Man is an alien, and we don't know if the G-Man is human. There's a lot of implication, but there's also not really any confirmation as to which is the correct conclusion. Regardless of what he is, the G-Man is a character who still follows human customs and goes as far as to refer to his overseers as employers. The G-Man's employers are an interesting complement to the omnipotent force that the G-Man bears. This is a man, or a thing, that has the ability to seemingly manipulate time and freeze people by putting them into a stasis, therefore making them immune to the effects of time. While he appears to have general control over his own actions and powers, he will always abide by the wishes of said employers. And there's a few key lines that help us understand who they might be and what their desires are, which, to be bluntly honest, are not really obvious.
I have recommended your services to my employers, and they have authorized me to offer you a job. They agree with me that you have limitless potential.
This is the first line in the entire franchise that indicates this mysterious figure has overseers. However, they don't seem to be strict or authoritarian. They appear to respect the G-Man's opinions, and in the case of the original Half-Life, actually take his advice. Of course, while the G-Man has employers that he directly reports to, there are multiple indications throughout the franchise that suggest there are rivalries between him and his employers among other groups or entities. Half-Life 2 further develops details of this quote-unquote job that Gordon took from the G-Man. The mysterious administrator of Black Mesa from the original game is introduced to be Dr. Wallace Breen, now the administrator of the entire planet which is ruled by the Combine. Breen is a fascinating character, and frankly deserves his own video. However, for the sake of brevity, we won't go too deep into his character. Breen is a character who is assumed to have a strong connection with the G-Man, and this is indicated through multiple lines that seem to imply he is aware of the so-called contract Gordon has with the G-Man.
Fortunately, the Resistance has shown it is willing to accept a new leader, and this one has proven to be a fine pawn for those who control him. How about it, Dr. Freeman? Did you realize your contract was open to the highest bidder?
These are lines which put the G-Man's relationship with Gordon Freeman into a much different light. They imply that Breen is well aware of the fact that Gordon is at the behest of the G-Man and his employers. Not only is he aware of Gordon's contract, he seems to also be aware of the way that it can be quote-unquote won from the G-Man's employers. Although it is possible this is just a manner of speech, and bidding for Freeman isn't a thing he can actually do. During the Nova Prospect portion of the game, Breen further hints at the fact he is also aware that Gordon was in a form of stasis, implying that he is well aware not only of the G-Man and his employers, but the powers they possess as well.
Gordon Freeman is a theoretical physicist who had hardly earned the distinction of his PhD at the time of the Black Mesa incident. I have good reason to believe that in the intervening years, he was in a state that precluded further development of covert skills. The man you have consistently failed to slow, let alone capture, is by all standards simply that, an ordinary man.
It's important to recognize the quote, state that precluded further development of covert skills, which showcases Breen's understanding of the timeless state that Gordon was preserved in, thus the lack of covert skills as he would call it. Unlike other characters who are aware of the G-Man like Eli, Breen is a character who seems well aware that Gordon and his contract are available to beings that possess some form of higher power, human or not. In the ending cutscene of Half-Life 2, the G-Man further supports this idea, stating,
"You've done so well, in fact, that I've received some interesting offers for your services. Ordinarily, I wouldn't contemplate them, but these are extraordinary times."
This line has some strong implications. For one, it presents the fact that Gordon's contract is in fact available to others. And then much like Breen suggested, it can be sought after by others as well. Within the context of this quote specifically, it's not clear whether these offers are from the G-Man's employers and organization, or whether it's from another union such as the Combine. It suggests that the command the employers have over the G-Man may be weaker than previously thought, and Episode 2 further supports this theory. During the heart-to-heart cutscene, he refers to the rescue of Alyx from Black Mesa, stating that,
"When I plucked her from Black Mesa, I acted in the face of objections that she was a mere child and of no practical use to anyone. I have learned to ignore such naysayers when quelling them was out of the question."
This is a line which I actually misunderstood at first, and it's a line that needs its visual counterpart to make sense. You may have noticed that during this cutscene, an image of Breen briefly appears on screen, heavily implying that the G-Man is actually referring to Breen in this scene rather than his employers. It's a unique quote given that if this is indeed referring to Breen, it implies that he was aware of the G-Man's power well before the events of the original Half-Life. There is an entire conversation to be had about the relationship preceding the events of Half-Life 2, but that's for another time. What's more important is that this implies that he may have actually had some power against the G-Man, though this is purely a theory and doesn't really have any other information to support it. More relevant to the G-Man and his employers is a line in the same cutscene, where he states,
"I wish I could do more than keep an eye on you, but I have agreed to abide by certain restrictions."
These restrictions are never clear, though it may likely have to do with the quote-unquote worth that she was determined to have. Cut lines from the same cutscene support this, and these are likely meant to be a build-up for what would eventually be the events of Half-Life Alyx. It can be assumed that these restrictions are likely imposed by his employers, but the specific statement that, "I have agreed to abide," implies that the G-Man was almost reluctant to agree to said restrictions, or had his own hesitations about the idea of not watching over Gordon. Now it's time to address the game that changed everything. Half-Life Alyx. This game had a major impact on the Half-Life story and lore. Most importantly, it also built upon the G-Man's character, and gave us a much clearer picture of the powers that he possesses. Let's break down the ending scene with him and Alyx.
"Some believe the fate of our worlds is inflexible. My employers disagree. They authorize me to nudge things in a particular direction from time to time."
The G-Man can manipulate time. Yeah. At the very least, the G-Man has the ability to influence certain events which can then change the flow of time. If there is a limit to this ability, it's not known, although a succeeding line suggests that his limits may just be restricted to the will of his employers.
That would be a considerably large nudge. Too large, given the interests of my employers.
This line is spoken following Alyx's request for the G-Man to remove the Combine from Earth. It's an interesting refusal not only for the fact that it seems to be unreasonable to begin with, but more for the fact that it's a request too large to grant given what his employers desire. That leaves the question, what do his employers want? What does the G-Man want?
A previous hire has been unable or unwilling to perform the tasks laid before him. We have struggled to find a suitable replacement until now.
This line is thus relative to the powers that the G-Man possesses and is instead indicative of the limits of the power he has. While of course this line is mostly important for the undertone of, "Hi guys, sorry we haven't made a Half-Life game in over a decade," the part to take note of is the unwilling portion of the quote. implying that those who G-Man has a contract with may actually be able to refuse his commands. The opening cutscene in episode 1 shows that the G-Man can be stopped, at least by the Vortigoths, so it's not out of the question that the death machine that is Gordon Freeman could refuse the G-Man's orders. However unlikely that may be given the bad ending of the original game and the fact that the Vortigoths rescued Gordon from the G-Man in episode 1.
Well, it looks like we won't be working together. No regrets, Mr. Freeman.
Another important component regarding the limits to the G-Man's power is the fact that in Half-Life Alyx, he was able to be captured by the Combine and contained within the vault, which uses Vortigoth power to keep him secure like in episode 1. HLX also reveals that the Combine advisors seem to misunderstand who the G-Man truly is, in a conversation with an unnamed human Combine scientist. She constantly asks the advisors to move the vault so that Alyx can't get to it to free who at the time is assumed to be Gordon Freeman, without knowing that she would unleash an incredibly powerful force.
Look, this guy we've got in there survived Black Mesa. He raised holy hell and then just disappeared. We finally caught him and you're just gonna let him go again? Move the box!
It's also unknown if the G-Man willingly let himself be captured, but given his previous speeches about the importance of Alyx in episode 2, it's safe to assume that this was his intention and he expected things to go this way. Whether the scientist knew the G-Man's powers and high level of intuition is also unknown, but if anything it shows us that the G-Man's identity is more widely known than it was before. On July 5th, 2019, Valve artist Zabi Eng posted a reply on Twitter to a Starfield Easter egg seen in Eli's lab, with the response, "Cool you noticed this. Some Easter eggs are too hard to find. No one has ever found the G-Man face I put in Eli's lab." I only recently discovered this through a Steam guide, which detailed all of the G-Man appearances while I was doing research for this video, and frankly I found it creepy as hell. You know, despite it just being an Easter egg, I did find it to be very indicative of who the G-Man is. He is a man with an overwhelming presence and an overwhelming goal, but that goal is unknown. His employer's goals are unknown. What are the conditions of Gordon's contract? We don't really know, and maybe we never will. G-Man and government figures aren't scarce in gaming. In fact, they're plentiful. However, the G-Man is the one to stand out among all of them. This pale, tight-faced, thin, middle-aged man has an appearance that isn't particularly special, yet somehow it gives off this feeling of eeriness. That this guy is f***ed up. He's a unique character in the lore of Half-Life because he's a step above the player and the majority of other characters in the universe, but entities and people like the Combine, Breen, the unnamed scientist, and the Vortigoths make him seem like he's on a different plane of existence. And honestly, given what we know about the Half-Life universe and the G-Man himself, it's not really impossible. One final thing I'd like to add is this piece of concept art shown in the final hours of Half-Life Alyx. It appears to show the G-Man with his face in his hands in what appears to be the vault given the Combine wiring and the green hue. We don't know what this art was supposed to be conceptually besides it being for a cut ending. Perhaps he's regretful, we really don't know, but it's an interesting thing to consider when analyzing his character. That this confident, upright guy could be regretful, could have remorse, could have feelings. The G-Man is an iconic character because he's creepy. He's mysterious, and after over 2 decades of existence, we still don't know what his goals are, what his employer's goals are. This is a being which is able to take people like Alyx Vance, Gordon Freeman, and Adrian Shepard and store them like ice cream in a freezer, just waiting to be used, or eaten. Maybe not the guys, but the ice cream. You get the point. Shepard is unique because he's not in stasis. He's instead detained with little indication as to what that really means. For all we know, he's probably still in the V-22 Osprey he's left in at the end of Opposing Force. He's also particularly unique because he's the one character the G-Man has actually resonated with, saying,
"But there is still the lingering matter of witnesses. I admit I have a fascination with those who adapt and survive against all odds. They rather remind me of myself. If for no other reason, I have argued to preserve you for a time."
Now, yes, I realize I stated earlier in the video that Op4 and Blue Shift were not going to be discussed because their status as canon or non-canon is debated. But Mark Laidlaw himself has stated that he is neither canon nor non-canon, which largely depends on whether Valve ever brings him back as a character given his only appearance is constricted to Op4, as compared to Barney, who went on to have a major appearance in Half-Life 2. Valve may never truly explain the G-Man's motives nor what his employees truly want. They possess these people as employees, against their will to use as puppets in influencing events. It leaves you wondering. It leaves you theorizing. I mean, seriously. The amount of people who call the G-Man gaming's biggest mystery is ridiculous, but they're also not wrong. Without him, Half-Life would be one-sided. But instead, we're left with this mysterious overseer watching and controlling every action we make as characters in the Half-Life franchise. There is so much to be said about him. There are so many theories, and there are so many videos, so many articles, so many forums out there describing who the G-Man is, what he could be, and what he might be in the future. And there's just so much, and they're all really, really good. In fact, I've actually included one theory in particular in the description that I found to be fairly reasonable. I highly suggest giving it a read. Given the ending of Half-Life Alyx, it can be assumed that the next Half-Life, or at least the next sequel Half-Life, will involve Gordon and Eli hunting down the G-Man. Meaning this will be the first Half-Life game where the G-Man actually is the primary antagonist rather than the Combine or the Zen creatures. And you know what? Maybe we'll finally learn who or what this thing truly is. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe! Peace and love, my friends. Peace and love.
Send me home!
I'm afraid you misunderstand the situation, Miss Vance.